Welcome to the Digital Amateur Television Experimenters Night. This is VK7OTC, the club station of the Radio and Electronics Association of Southern Tasmania. Amateur radio is a worldwide hobby that has many different aspects. Digital television is just one of the many modes and areas that are covered. Maybe you're interested in becoming involved in the DATV Experimenters Nights. You realise that you do not have to be a radio amateur or need any ATV equipment to participate anywhere in the world. Also participate on the night by coming up to the Queen's Domain club rooms. Yes, right on top of the Queen's Domain in the heritage-listed Coast Wireless Station. You never know, we might get you in front of the camera or behind doing one of the many roles during the night. We get underway with our program on a Wednesday night from 7:30pm local time. We'll see you soon. This is VK7 OTC.
This is VK7 OTC, the club station of the Radio and Electronics Association of Southern Tasmania, with our digital amateur television experimenters nights. And we've got working from the Shack edition number 5, Shack Tours Unlimited, and we've got waiting in the green room, Rex Moncur VK7MO. So we'll get to Rex in a sec. We've got a few little segments before and a few little items beforehand. Just reminding people, you can call in, range of options, repeater 2 on 146 700. You can also call in on DMR 3807, and I have tested that tonight and it appears to be all working okay, so we will do some questions and callbacks on 3807 as well. And also, of course, there is the YouTube chat channel. And good evening to Murray and good evening to Richard, who are already on the chat channel. So you're welcome to ask questions and make comments via any of those mediums, and I'll try to weave it in. So that's the feedback section. And thank you again. There is lots of comments coming in from a whole range of areas. I am absolutely amazed. Okay, Scott. Yeah, all right. That's back a bees thing. Done. Thank you, Scott. Scott VK7HSE also here. And we got a phenomenal response to Mike Jenner's VK7FB's interview last week, because I think it's well over 80 particular views of that particular video, so that interview. So wow. We've set the bar high, Rex. Now, just before we get into to the interview with Rex, Roger Harrison, VK7ZRH, who is the interim, in big inverted commas, manager of the summer and winter VHF UHF field days, released the field day results for the summer field day during this last week. And makes the comment, he processed 95 logs from 92 stations, which was held over the 18th of January. There were, now I'll just go to the back here, Active stations per state. Now, we had for the size of the state an excellent representation, which was we had the number of stations participating being 37, and the number of submitted logs was 20, which is a bit of frustration for a lot of people. However, we had the best, I suppose, the best percentage of logs put in with 54%. And the next best was VK6, and there were 2 stations that participated and only one put a log in, so they got 50%. So 37 stations participated and 20 put their logs in. Just notably, there were some fantastic scores from VK7. Andrew DeWater, VK7DW, James McAwee, VK7JAM, Murray, ZMS, Ben was in there, Warren was in there. Hang on, let's turn over the page. Yours truly down at Eaglehawk Neck. We had the multi-operator VK7OTC with Richard and Hayden up on Mount Wellington. We had Alan Williams, Al Burke, Scott was in there, Ross Broomall, VK7 Australian Lighthouse, ALH, and Peter Dodd, VK7 KPC, and Ron Mann, VK7 RM was also in the list. Alan Jeffrey, Paul Pruss, Richard as a home station, and Hayden as a home station, Vince, Peter Dowd, and VK7DW again as a home station. So fantastic roll up. So congratulations to VK7. I think we put on a fantastic show. So there you go. Good stuff. Now we'll get over. We'll bring Rex over from. Just bear with me. We'll bring Rex over from the green room. I like that. And good evening, Rex. How would you be?
Good evening, Justin, and good evening, everyone.
And we've got Rex, and I think it's very apt, Rex, that you're sitting with a relief map of Tasmania behind you.
That's right. When I was sort of planning things like VHF contacts around Tasmania and light contacts, having a relief map in the shack to remind me of the paths was wonderful.
Fantastic. I love it. I absolutely love it. So, welcome. And what I might get you to do is just start off with our question of a bit of about yourself and a bit about your history, Rex.
Okay. Well, I have to start my history with my dad, who was a ham, and Justin hopefully can bring up a photograph. Can you?
I can now.
Yeah.
If I bring this across into here and push the magic button, there we go.
Right. Okay. Well, here's my dad. I'm not sure the date of this, but it's a nice photo. In front of his ear, you'll notice it's all masonite panels. Well, you probably don't notice it, but I noticed. Once TV came along, he had to shield everything in aluminium. But he got his he got his license about 1929, 1930. And if we go to the next picture,
yep,
that's what his shack looked like in the early 1930s. The receivers are on the table on the right hand side. The transmitters are in the middle, and the thing on the chair is an automatic CQ caller with brass contacts all around the edge, and a gramophone motor, and
I love it.
he was able to automatically call CQ.
And what was his call sign, Rex?
His call sign was VK3LN of London, Norway.
Okay.
And his name was Len, Len.
Okay.
I think he couldn't get LM because somebody else had it before him.
Okay.
But his call sign was fairly well known from the 1930s, really up until about the 1970s. Yep.
And you mentioned the other day about the all the QSL cards that were on the wall.
Yes. I've looked closely at them in the photo, and they're all fairly close to where he lived, which was in Melbourne and where I was brought up.
Okay.
Mostly VK3s, a few VK57s and 2s, and a couple of ZLs. But it looks like, at least in those days, he didn't work a lot of overseas DX, or if he did, he maybe filled the walls with the first ones he worked, and they were later. But
ran out of wall space.
I know by 1936, he actually took a trip round the USA, and he basically took a handful of WQSL cards.
Okay.
And was basically invited to stay at numerous hams all around the States. So at least by 1936 he must have been working plenty of DX. Maybe the sunspots were good in 1934 or 5 or something.
Ooh, yeah. Certainly better than now.
Yeah. The noise was a lot less though.
Oh, well, yes. Not quite so many funny electronic devices emitting bad noise. Yes.
Okay, next slide. Or photo.
Oh.
Now, by about the late 1930s, he started experimenting with television, and this is a pair of flying spot scanners. Well, one for transmit and one for receive. The advantage of this system is they use one motor for both, and that means you can actually test it out with perfect synchronization because both flying spots are on the same shaft. I'm not sure whether you can see a big cross in front of it, and the thing worked well enough to detect that was a cross, but that was about the limit of it, and I think it was 15 lines by 15 lines.
Right.
Okay.
So pretty low resolution then.
That's right.
But perfect synchronization though.
Yes. During the war, he actually went into the RAF, and because of his ham credentials, he was allowed to install radars in aeroplanes, and
Okay.
They actually gave him quite a bit of training and stuff while he was in the RAF, so that he came out of the war all bubbling with excitement to do interesting things, and he built this antenna on the roof of our house.
Right.
That photo only shows 5 elements, but it was 4 elements, but it was at one stage 5 elements on 20 metres, full size, and there was sort of interleaved into it 15 and 10 metres.
Okay. And that's a fairly substantial tower as well, that's sort of underneath it.
Oh, yeah, it's behind a very small shop, actually.
Right.
Next slide,
Now,
which is where I was brought up.
that's a good point, Rex. What was Len's occupation in daytime job?
He was a tailor, and his father was a tailor, and the shop that we lived behind was a tailor's shop, menswear as well.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to, being the eldest son, become a tailor, but fortunately I diverted in different directions.
Well, you did end up. Yeah.
My middle brother unfortunately went into the business, and the tailoring went down and down and down over his lifetime.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, you did work with a tailor.
Yes, I did.
Sorry, that was a really bad joke.
Okay, now this is a shot of what happened when the wind blew. And this antenna, that's the same one that was in the photo, just collapsed. Unfortunately, the roof on one side there is a slate roof, and because my dad was so keen on getting his antenna up again, he actually rebuilt it in galvanised iron rather than wood. He didn't pay a lot of attention to repairing the slate roof, just put bits of what they called malsoid in to fill the gaps he could see.
Okay.
And for the next 40 years, every time it rained, my poor mother used to have to get out buckets and put them all round the house.
I love it.
Okay. Next slide. Now, after the war, because the radar experience brought him across things like cathode ray tubes and stuff, he changed his television interests into what I would have called mechanical television to electronic television. And this is a photo of his transmitter and television receiver, which I still have under the house here.
Fantastic.
And he was never allowed by the PMG to transmit television signals because they were worried that amateurs might establish TV standards that were different to what they were ultimately going to introduce. But he did demonstrate it just on over cables. And the next slide, if we look at this.
This is very impressive.
Yep. Now, this was a WIA stand in the exhibition buildings in Melbourne. For those who don't know, these buildings were made for a world fair in about 1880 something as a temporary building, and of course they are still there. But in sort of 1949 or so, the WIA was able to put on an exhibit about amateur radio to encourage people to into the hobby.
Yep.
And my dad actually set up this whole display, and his TV was part of it.
Okay.
And he had a receiver on one side of the stand and a transmitter, and people would queue up to put their face in front of the transmitter, and Dad would say, get your friends to have a look at you on the other side, and they could recognise people.
Okay.
And then he'd play a game, and he'd say, if you're quick, run to the other side and you see yourself. Of course, nobody could ever do.
I love it.
But this was at one end of the exhibition buildings on a raised platform, and the WIA had pride of place in what was the models exhibition for several years that I remember.
Okay.
And I can remember Dad setting things up. For those that know the exhibition building, there's a big flagpole on the dome, and he was able to access the bottom of the dome and put V-beams from there all down to the ground in different angles, so that they could actually set up and demonstrate HF.
Wow. Okay. And it's
okay.
a huge building. It's just,
That's right.
it's phenomenal. In fact,
And I remember, even in those days, I remember Dad telling me that the fire brigade had been told that if it starts to burn, they're not allowed inside it.
right.
It's just too dangerous.
Yeah,
Because it's
okay.
all wood.
They held,
very lucky that it's still there.
yeah, they held the first federal parliaments in there, I think, from memory. If
I think that might be right.
yes, when
yes.
Canberra didn't exist, or they
Yes.
were planning Canberra. That's very impressive, Rex. That's huge. That's just
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, dear, oh dear.
Okay. Well, that's by this time I'm around, so I knew what was going on. Obviously, very interested in radio, and I went for my limited operators or certificate of proficiency, and the date on this is March 1960, which means that I've been licensed. I'm not sure exactly when you get your license. I think you have to write to it after you get your certificate, but essentially I've been licensed for just over 60 years.
Wow.
And that's what got me into the hobby.
Okay.
Because I got a Z call at that stage, VK3ZHI, my interest was in VHF. And next slide.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh.
This was a little 2-meter transmitter that I built up. It had, I forget the words they used, but you were able to vary your frequency by putting an inductor in series with a crystal. That's the reason there's a knob on the transmitter, so that you could actually tune around a little bit. QQEO3/12 in the final, 12A6 or something in the modulator.
Okay.
In the front is a little converter, which by this time was TV type tubes, because TV came in 56, and I got my license, must have been about, 1960, yes. So TV type tubes were very useful at VHF. Next slide. Okay, this is a 432 meg transmitter that I built up not long after we got the band. I think we got the band on the 1st of January 1964, and the sockets that are empty up to Q3 bar 20 generated 2 meters. That went into another bar 20 tripler, and then to a 640 amplifier at 432. And the thing at the top is a solid state power supply to generate the high voltage and modulator. I still have all this. That's why I was able to produce the photos. And with this, not much after we got the band, I got the Australian 432 meg record at 97.3 miles. Compared to what we can do today, it's amazing that what we can now do, but that was an enormous thrill for someone who was 22 at the time.
Wow.
Getting this all to work.
And when you say it's the inaugural national 432 record, it was the first one, first 432 meg record set in Australia.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
So this was the start of your record-breaking efforts. This is sort of.
It was, and in fact, I did actually about 2 years later. I used that 40-watt amplifier to drive a 1296 meg tripler that produced a Victorian record of 400 yards.
Woohoo!
But at least I was on 1296 back in about 1966, and it is amazing that just today there were about 7 people on 1296, just working everybody, and certainly a lot more than 400 yards.
400 yards, yes,
So,
okay. And that was using the lighthouse tube that you were talking about? That was...
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, a 2C39 lighthouse tube, which I subsequently gave to Dave, who put it into a 432 meg rig.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I didn't keep that unit, which is a shame. But certainly, I was always interested in getting higher red frequency, and 1296 was pretty high in those days.
Oh yes, wow. So
and I was doing it portable, and the reason for doing it portable is you could drive to a ham's place, set up outside, tune everything up, and drive a bit further away until you lost the signal.
and then work out what the distance was.
Yeah. Now the reality is, I was taking 40 amps out of my car battery to get enough power to just get a P lamp to glow at 1296. But these were fun days.
Yes, yeah.
And,
So was your father still alive in 1964?
Oh yes,
So
he was, but he had changed his interests away from ham radio to making cartoon type movies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I mean, he was always very proud of what I was doing, but and he was on 2 meters, so he was.
Okay.
In fact, he was on 112 megs before the war, when we had 112 meg band.
Yep.
So there was a period when I had my license and he and I was sort of overlapping.
Yep.
But
Okay.
not a lot. But he was certainly the person that. I mean, I pinched half his valves out of his drawers and capacitors and actually destroyed a lot of things that should have been kept for heritage. But well, that's the way things happen. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Now there was a big gap in my ham radio career. About 1973, I moved to Canberra into a range of jobs, which meant there was just no time to do ham radio. Although some of the things were interesting, well, ultimately interesting to ham radio. For instance, I was involved in the administrative aspects of setting up the agreement with the US Air Force to run the solar observatory at Learmonth, which we now use the data when we're working out sun noise for EME.
Yep.
I was also I was the Canberra liaison officer for the ionospheric prediction service, so
okay.
That was good. And before I went to Canberra, I was working with the Bureau of Meteorology, setting up and responsible for their radioson network, and that's proved very valuable to a lot of VHF propagation, understanding of ducting and absorption and stuff. So
truly,
some of that work experience helped.
Definitely.
But after about 11 years in Canberra, I came down here to the Antarctic Division, and again I had jobs which meant ham radio just didn't happen.
Yeah.
I did keep in touch with my dad every Sunday night on 40 metres, so he was active enough to talk to me.
Okay.
Even when I was down here, it gave him an opportunity to speak to his grandchildren, who are now in their 40s and 50s and have little children. Well, some of them not that little, as you know.
Correct.
Same age as Reuben. So it was when I retired. My wife always said to me, you get back into ham radio once you retire. And I said, I don't think I'm ever going to catch up. It's all solid state now. I think it's all beyond me. But and our intention was to do a bit of overseas tripping together, but unfortunately she passed away just a few months after I retired, and I was looking for things to do, and it turned out I went to someone's 50th birthday party in Adelaide who had taken up ham radio, and I saw he had this lovely little rig. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was like an FT847.
Okay.
And I thought, I'd like to get something like this and have a go at ham radio again. So I did buy myself an FT847, which Peter Dowd now has.
Lovely rig. Yes.
Yeah. And I initially got on just on the local repeater here and talking to people, and I was thinking, why doesn't anything happen down the bottom end of the band on SSB? And people said to me, you can't get out of Hobart on 2 metres. But
the challenge has been set. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that happened was someone said, look, why don't you contact Joe Gelston? He's into 2 metres DX.
Yep.
You might be able to work him. Well, I got in touch with Joe, and Joe's, as you know, one of the keenest persons, most enthusiastic people you could ever meet.
Yep.
And we found we could actually work each other on 2 metres, and then the challenge was, how can we get it from Hobart across Bass Strait? And I started playing around with aircraft scatter, and this photo, it's not from Hobart, it's actually a photo of some aircraft scatter signals when I was at Yass, and VK3II was transmitting a constant carrier.
Okay.
And all these aircraft are flying between Melbourne and Sydney, and the ones with the funny curves are ones that dive off to land in Canberra.
Okay.
And so this is an example of aircraft scatter. I got to the point where I could work people on the mainland on aircraft scatter. Unfortunately, there's no aircraft paths that are exactly ideal for, say, Melbourne, but there was a guy in Gippsland I was able to work.
Okay.
And that sort of got me involved in, and this was only digital that would work.
Yeah.
I think we're using Spec Train at the time and just transmitting carriers and things to see what would happen.
Now, Rex,
About this
I'll just butt in there. Scott Evans, VK7HSE, just said you borrowed my FT847 for a few of your 6 metre, 2 metre and 70 centimetre tests in the early 2000s. So, yeah.
Okay.
That
might have been before I actually
purchased it.
Bought my own.
Because it also mentions it was aircraft enhancement using Hellschreiber.
That's right. Well, mainly House Driver was for meteor scatter.
Okay.
And particularly on 6 meters, that worked pretty well, but the meteor pings were too short for 2 meters. But I got onto an American who had he had a contact with a Romanian student who wrote a little program that would actually exchange call signs pretty well on 2 meters on meteor scatter. But the American guy after a while said to me, look, I've got a friend over here who can make a much better program. And I sort of rolled my eyes and thought, oh yeah, Americans think they can do everything better than us. But it turned out that this friend was, next slide.
Was that Taylor I was talking about? Yes.
And I was there right at the start when Joe first produced FSK 441 and was testing that for him. And I wrote an article for CQ magazine on what we were doing in VK.
Yep.
And I had close contact with Joe ever since, and in fact, even over the last few days, he's been sending me improved averaging versions of JT65, which I've been doing lots of testing on and giving him feedback, some of which I sort of wonder whether he thinks I'm just being too pernickety, but he did ask for the feedback, so he gets it.
Correct.
Of course, WSJT fairly quickly morphed from just meteor scatter into what was then JT44,
Yep.
Which was the first mode that was useful for EME. And by 2004, I'd had my first EME contact on 2 meters, just with a single Yagi. And about that time, I did a trip to Lord Howe Island with the idea of doing meteor scatter. And somehow the Yanks found out that I was going there, and they were desperate to get a new DXCC on EME. And I went there with Trevor Spargo.
VK7TS.
That's right. Now, Trevor, primarily, he organised the trip, and his prime interest was in HF.
Yep.
Anyway, these Americans somehow got on to the people who owned the place we were living at, and there was messages coming through telling us what time we had to be on to try JT4. Well, all I had was the 910 with us, which never got the 400 watts out, sort of about 70 watts out, and a single Yagi. So anyway, I thought, oh well, I'll give it a try. And the way JT44 worked, it sort of gradually built up the message, and you could see your own call sign gradually build up, and the other guy's call sign gradually build up. But by the time you had something that you could actually say, I've got both call signs in a signal report, you might have had to repeat the message for half an hour. And of course, by the time you did that both ways, it took forever. And poor old Trevor couldn't operate, because if he transmitted on HF, he mucked up my decodes completely. So that was a fun time.
There was some creative tension, yeah.
Trevor was very polite, but I could tell that he had organised this trip and he really wanted to make his contacts. So I think I worked 2 stations in America and 1 in Sweden.
Okay.
While I was out there, but that put Lord Howe Island on the EME map, so that
fantastic.
was good. And of course, JT65 came later and improved things. If we go to the next slide, I then did a trip out to Christmas and Cocos Islands, and I made up a Yagi that I could actually carry as luggage in the hold.
Yeah, yep.
And disassemble it all. And basically there were strings where tied to either coconuts or lumps of coral, which allowed me to swing this antenna around. I think it had something like about 19 elements on 2 meters.
Okay.
And I worked, I think, about 150 stations
wow.
on EME.
Okay.
Perhaps about half of them at one station and half at Cocos Island and half at Christmas Island.
Yep.
And I had a couple of contacts on 432 with a couple of big guns.
Okay.
On JT65. Next slide.
Recognise that.
Now, about this time, Mike 7MJ said he had his friend who was
Chris Long. Chris Long.
Chris Long.
Yep.
Was coming to Tasmania and wanted somebody to help him because Chris didn't have a car driving licence, I think.
Yeah.
And so I heard this on the broadcast and offered to help, and sort of got sucked into optical, and that led to this optical receiver. And if we go to the next slide,
oh, very good.
This optical transmitter, which Joe was using,
affectionately known as the cloud burner.
yes, and that unfortunately we only had one system of this nature. Justin had many systems, but with this sort of capability, so we only had one way, but we did get messages from across across Bass Strait.
Yes.
I think it was 288 kilometres, which was the longest optical, and certainly I think the only long cloud bounce contact.
Yeah, non-line of sight. Well,
and but yes. Now the interesting thing about that was when we actually investigated it, there was an even longer optical contact by about 5 kilometres done by the American Army in about 1875 between 2 high mountains in the USA using a heliograph.
Using heliographs, and it was bidirectional. It was
Yeah, and of course they had a rather even stronger light source than the LEDs.
slightly more powerful, yeah.
Yeah, which they were reflecting. But in terms of an electronic system, that's still the longest distance that's been done.
Fantastic.
Okay, next slide.
Very good.
Now, having I did go to 432 meg EME, and about this time Joe Taylor started introducing different versions of JT65, the A, B and C version, and the C version was designed for 1296, and this was a 2.4 metre dish, and I worked maybe about 80 stations on EME with this, and 100 watts, and that's my little grandson, who's now about 12 years old, so that was a while ago. He loved just pressing the buttons to drive the dish in azimuth and elevation.
Now that was quite an intricate little rig, wasn't it, Rex? I remember that, because it was.
Yeah, I could lay it down back into the balcony when I wasn't using it, because I didn't want to attract too much attention from the neighbours looking at this dish in out their nice windows across the Derwent.
Yes, thinking you're a terrorist. Yeah, communicating.
I've always got on really well with my neighbours, so it's worked out okay. But it's no point in pushing things any harder than you have to.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, next slide. Now, this was the dish out of Cambridge, which Justin and I got. We sort of got roped into this by a guy in the United States. I've forgotten his name now, but he was looking to do EME with some of the for the 40th anniversary of the moon landing.
Yep.
And he got onto the University of Tasmania, who had this dish from a rural valley, so it wasn't the dish used for the moon landing, but it's very similar to the one at Honeysuckle Creek, or that was at Honeysuckle Creek.
Yep.
And I went out and visited the site with a guy named Lovell, but it wasn't the astronaut Lovell, but
Jim Lovell.
Jim Lovell.
Yep.
And we had a meeting out there. I don't know whether you were there, Justin,
No.
but I started talking to them. They were quite keen to be involved, and I started talking to them, and I said, you've got these liquid helium preamps and things up there. I don't think we're going to be able to run 100 watts on 1296. And it started to dawn on them that, yes, this wasn't going to be a good idea. And we worked out that it would be safe, providing I didn't run more than about 10 milliwatts. And I did the sums and concluded that 10 milliwatts should still work on JT65, but only to another 26 metre dish or 25 metre dish that was in Holland. And we set up to do that. We did work Doug MacArthur. We could copy Doug MacArthur okay on voice.
Yep.
But of course, Doug wouldn't have a have a digital QSO, because that was forbidden for Doug.
Yeah, against his religion. Yeah.
Yes.
Bless him.
We did have. If Warren's listening, Warren brought his children along, and
Yes. Yeah.
I think they listened to Doug MacArthur calling out their names, because we told Doug by internet.
That's right.
Who was listening?
That's right. And
Ultimately,
Paul
we got
Hanson's
down-
kids as well. Yes.
Yes. Ultimately, we got down to 3 milliwatts, which is
Amazing.
admittedly the other end wasn't at 3 milliwatts. They were running about 200 watts or so, but we had a QSO both ways with 3 milliwatts, which is certainly the smallest power that's ever been used for EME. Okay, next slide.
That was an amazing time, Rex.
Yes. Okay, after having used, got used to 1296, I went to a Gibbs Tech meeting, and Ralph VK3WRE gave a talk on how to get onto 10 gigs with what was called a white box, and they asked if anyone was interested. They would order some of these white boxes, which I'm not sure where they came from, but
a UK.
They were quite cheap, and so I put my name down. And anyway, when I was next in Melbourne, I went down to pick up my white box, and Ralph said, "Look, we knew you were down in Tasmania all on your own without anybody to talk to and any test equipment." So he'd already built it up into a complete system with a dish and all ready to go. I had a few contacts with Ralph up in Victoria, and then came down here, and of course there was nobody to work, but Doug VK4AOE, Doug Friend.
Yep.
He came down with his portable gear and gave me a grid square from a hotel in Hobart on the other grid square, which is the one where you've just got to go a bit south of Kingston.
Yep.
About this time I started to conclude that this white box wasn't going to do everything I wanted, and I built up a separate system with properly GPS locked and digital modes and everything for 10 gigs. At some stage I then gave the white box to Justin, who has developed it a lot further.
Correct.
But at least it's in good hands.
And working wonderfully.
Now, I was mainly at this time interested in aircraft scatter and doing grid squares with David VK38Z.
Yeah.
And Joe Taylor developed the mode called iScat, which responded very well to these short bursts that you got off aircraft at 10 gigs, usually at no more than a couple of seconds. And David and I, David stayed basically within his 50 kilometre radius in Melbourne, on the highest hills he could find within that radius in the direction I went, and we activated some 82 grid squares on 10 gigs.
Wow. And this was Rex. This was at a time when the number of grid squares that the US 10 gigas were doing was far less than that.
That's right. Very few at all. That's right. Actually, about this time I started doing EME and doing it from grid squares. A little bit later I went up to 50 watts, and I think I had done something like about 100 grid squares around Australia, and the whole of Europe only had about 20, so that changed things. Then I decided that it ought to be possible to break the existing world record on 10 gigs from, if I could get a duct between Tasmania and Western Australia. I think it was possible to break it only by about 30 kilometres. So I built up a second system, one with 50 watts, and I still kept the 10 watt system, which I took over to VK60Z, I've forgotten his name now. And then I did a training session for him by going around and doing lots of grid squares in southern Western Australia. On the way back, I actually had a contact with him from Victoria. It wasn't a record, it wasn't a world record.
Okay.
And then the following year, I waited and waited until the Hepburn chart showed something promising, and went up and broke the world record from up in Cape Portland. And then the year later, Derek went who went a bit further to the east. We extended it another 60 kilometres.
Okay.
And that is still the 10 gigs terrestrial world record.
Fantastic.
We'll go to the next slide.
Okay. Done.
Then I moved up to 24 gigs, and this was doing EME from Mount Wellington. The advantage of going up Mount Wellington is you save a lot of moisture, because most of the moisture is in the lower atmosphere. And I worked Charlie G3 Whiskey Delta Golf on EME on 24 gigs. We both had 10 watt amps at that stage, and it was very marginal. But later I was able to, I phased up another 10 watt amp so I could get 20 watts out, and work Charlie from down in the Tasman Peninsula to extend the 24 gig world record, which is still the world record.
Fantastic.
Next slide. Now, this is what my grid squares on 10 gigs looks like. And I think there's something like about 130 grid squares that I've worked with OK1KIR, including a couple in New Zealand. And that's what his website shows, all those little yellow squares where I've worked him from. I've worked a few other people at other sites, so there's probably about 150 grid squares overall on 10 gigs. Next slide. While I was out in Western Australia, there was a guy in the US who said he was going to go portable to Delaware, and I thought Delaware was a pretty rare state for 10 gigs in the States, and I worked it out that if I went as far away, fortunately, only a few months later he passed away, Jim. He was a really good guy to work with. Next slide.
Get there.
I was doing some work with Charlie Suckling on the smallest antenna you could do for EME, and this was a horn with an aperture about 3 inches by 4 inches, and we actually had a two-way contact off the moon. Next slide. And then to extend the world record, the only way to do it was to go to New Zealand. This is a 10 gig world record. I went through the process of figuring out how to get a dish over there, and given that Murray's listening, Murray said, you got no chance of cutting this dish up into and getting it to work. A little challenge he set for me. And this dish was cut up into with a jigsaw and finished up getting what is still the current world record on 10 gigs EME.
Very good. And that's actually
sort of
that's actually taken in New Zealand. That was your takeoff in New Zealand, was it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that dish is still in New Zealand.
Yep.
And I worked Roger, who had that dish, from up in New South Wales this last January for the first 10 gigs terrestrial over to New Zealand. Yep.
Fantastic. Perfect
All
takeoff
right.
point.
Well, that sort of covers my little sideshow.
Fantastic.
And unless you have any more questions, that's it.
We'll take. Hang on, I'll just get rid of that, and we'll. Okay. So we'll open it up. Just remind people either the YouTube chat channel or 2 meters or DMR. I'll go through each of them. Anybody who's on the watching the stream who'd like to put a question to the YouTube chat channel while we take some questions from the repeaters, etc., just stand by. This is VK7OTC, just standing by for any questions or any comments on Rex's presentation tonight, working from his shack. Over.
VK7O, well done, Rex. Great, interesting presentation. Thank you.
No problems, Ron. Thanks. Passed on to Rex, and we do actually, Rex. We do still have the shack tour as well to go.
Oh yes. Do you want me to go on the shack tour?
Oh, that's probably a good idea. We'll go to the shack tour. That sounds.
I think I've got to press a button now. Does that look like the shack tour?
That looks like the shack tour. So describe what we're looking at.
Okay, this is my shack at the back of my house. When I built this house, I didn't realise I would go above about 432, and I put a shack at the back of the house with a little balcony where I could wind up an antenna for 2 meters and 432, not realising that when I went up higher in frequency, trees would be a problem that generate noise. And so while this is really my official shack, and that's my 9100, the obligatory computer to run with it, a HF rig, and I thought I might just show you 2 books. This one is the AWL Handbook of 2016, and this one is the AWL Handbook of 1929. And
what edition is that, Rex?
Pardon?
What edition is it?
The 5th edition.
Ah, wacko.
And the interesting thing about it is the editor is Ross Hull.
Yes.
Well, there was joint editors, but with someone called Francis Edward Handy.
Handy, yeah.
And Ross Hull, who was an Australian.
There you go.
And Ross, unfortunately, was killed doing experiments with high voltage.
Yep.
In about 1938, and but he also was the first one to actually get any handle on ducting.
Propagation, yeah. Yep.
Ducting propagation, and as a result, he is the father of VHF long distance propagation, and the VHF and above contest is called the Ross Hull contest, held every summer.
Cool.
If I look at the size of the books, you can see.
Yeah, a slight difference.
It grew. Okay. The rest of the shack down here has some test equipment.
Signal generators, yeah.
Yes, signal generator for 10 gigs, signal generator for 2 meters, oscilloscope. I tend to like Hewlett Packard stuff which
Yep.
you can now get for probably a very small fraction of what it originally cost. The only downside is the electrolytics are all starting to dry out and need to be replaced, and that's a major effort. But
it's good gear.
There's more test equipment. So that's the back shack, and we'll now go up to the front shack, which had to be put into place for sort of 1296 and above to overcome the problem with trees. Now, this is theoretically a lounge room.
And how many dishes have you got there, Rex?
Well, there's a little dish here, which is a 10 gig dish, which 76 centimeters and 60 watts at 10 gigs. There's a bigger dish which runs 90 watts, just over a meter. It's getting to the point where it's almost too heavy for me to lift into place, particularly as I broke my finger playing around with dishes the other day. So I think there's an age limit on big dishes. So this is my preferred little dish. But if I really want to work another small station, I have to use that one. This dish is a 24 gig dish, which has, you can see two heat sinks there, which is the pair of phased up, waveguide phased up with magic tees to get 20 watts. This is my azimuth elevation system. I've had a few versions of these. My other versions are either at ZBX's place or WLH's place.
Richard just made the comment that the 750mm dish works very well.
Yeah. Oh, yes, he's had a lend of that one. Here's the 9700, which I use for as an IF for the microwaves, and also 1296. And well, there's no light outside. I have a balcony. Well, actually, I can turn a light on, a bit of a light. There's a balcony outside where I can mount dishes and antennas and.
And what direction, Rex, are you pointed at there? What?
That's pointed north.
Right.
And that's quite a good takeoff.
Yep.
That's across to Hobart, sort of northwest.
Yep.
To the States, I can work right down to zero. Unfortunately, to the west, there's a house next door which chops off about 10 or 12 degrees. But I can still, if the moon is in the right place, I can actually work Charlie in the UK, even to the west.
Okay.
I thought I'd also show you to the north. This is a graph of. Does the graph show up?
Oh yes.
This is a graph of the signal strengths of the VK3RGI beacon. That's in Victoria.
On what frequency?
432.
Oh, 432. Okay.
And 432. And you can see that this graph has a scale of about 25 dB of signal to noise ratio. So I'm actually able to monitor that beacon with signal to noise ratios of anything up to 25 dB, admittedly with an effective band pass of about 0.04 of a hertz. But if everything's GPS locked, you can do things like that. So that's one way of monitoring propagation.
Fantastic.
Okay, so that's probably done the shack tour.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we might go back to your back shack, so you're a bit more comfortable, and we'll see. There's a few comments here. Scott VK7HSE says must get some gear suitable for 2.4 and 5 gigs. And Richard's reminded him that there are a few people on 2.4, but to date nobody on 5.8. But also might be some issues with they are also ISM Wi-Fi bands, so there tends to be a lot of crap on those bands. But anyway, any other questions? Yeah. So I'll just put out a call. Now that's fascinating. Let me go to the hotspot. This is VK7 Tango Whiskey for VK7 OTC. Just putting out any questions for Rex following the shack tour and presentation by Rex. This is VK7 Tango Whiskey listening. No? Oh, hang on. No? I'll put out another call on R2. This is VK7 OTC, just standing by for any questions or comments on Rex's presentation. This is VK7 OTC listening.
VK7 Victor Hotel.
VK7 Victor Hotel, VK7 OTC. Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Justin. Rex, if you're listening, thank you. What another cracker of a tour and background information. You're an inspiration, Rex. Thank you so much indeed.
You want to say something to him, Rex?
Thank you. That's all I can say.
No problems at all, Vince. Thanks for the comments, and hope you got something out of the presentation. Cheers.
Yeah, very good. Thanks very much. And I'm watching via RF, of course. No internet doodle here. Over.
Real RF. Excellent. Good stuff, Vince. Any further comments or questions? Please go ahead. Okay, nothing heard. Thanks to those people who called in and gave us some questions. This is VK7 OTC now clear. We got a few. Comment from Warren. Wonderful history, Rex. Great presentation. Many thanks. So there you go. Good stuff.
Thank you, Warren. Who I met one night on the deck of, I think it was the Iceberg or the Aurora Australis, was it? And I said, where do you work? And he says, I work for you.
Oh, very good.
And gave me his business card.
Wow. A lot of people work for the Antarctic Division, don't they? In defence. No, very good indeed. Well, thank you, Rex. Thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic, and I love the photos. Absolutely love the photos, and there's so much history and so much endeavour in that. It's just phenomenal. So thank you very much for sharing with our audience.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Terrific.
All right, stay on the line, because if I do some magic trickery here, okay. So I just wanted to finish off with a reminder, because this Saturday there is a WIA conference. In fact, the conference would have been in 2 weeks' time, but anyway, that's another story. There is a contest, WIA contest, which is the Harry Angel Sprint, Memorial Sprint, which takes place on Saturday, the 2nd of May, between 10 and 11:46 UTC, which is 8 p.m. to 9:46 p.m. for the conversion. And the reason why it's a funny length of time is Harry Angel, who was VK4 Hotel Alpha, at the time he became Silent Key, was Australia's oldest licensed amateur at 106. So the contest length is 106 minutes. So it's a sprint on 80 metres. It's held on 80 metres. There is a CW, a mixed and a phone section that's available to you, and it's basically a scramble, a sprint for 106 minutes to see how many contacts you can get. So just a reminder that is on Saturday night, 80 metres. If conditions are usually reasonable on 80 metres around that time, so worth a try. And just a reminder that the championship points have been updated on the WIA website. So what that is they add up the points that you get for each of the contests, the WIA contests that you're actually in, and the ranking that you get. And that goes towards a championship at the end of the year. So it's worth just making an effort to get into a couple of those WIA contests. So and I just had Murray on DMR. I'm not sure whether Murray was trying to ask a question or what the story was. I'll go across to Murray. On DMR. No? Okay, no. Saw him flash past. Now, I'll finish off with VK7 HSE is giving us a wonderful talk next week. We've got a whole of club virtual meeting, and that Zoom address will be sent out to everybody in the next couple of days, and what that presentation night will focus on is DMR. So bring along all of your DMR questions. Scott will be focusing on the Radio Oddity GD77 handhelds, which there's a lot in southern Tasmania. Do a bit of a short recap on DMR technology and terminology, and then he'll focus on Roger Clark's Open GD77 firmware and take us through how you use that and how easy it is to use. So bring along your questions to the Zoom session for Scott on DMR. And also just a reminder that the WIA broadcast is actually coming from VK7 for the 10th and the 17th of May 2020. If you would like to become involved in doing some reading or helping out with us putting that broadcast together for the national broadcast for the 10th and the 17th of May, please get in contact with me, VK7TW at wia.org.au, and I will get you involved with putting it all together. So there you go. Now for our RF listeners and watchers, we've got a range of videos from Ham Radio 2.0, OH8STM, who gives a quite a recent, only about 2 weeks ago, IC705 update, which of course has been delayed, the release thereof, because of COVID-19. And a couple of other videos there, so that's for our RF listeners. So we'll sign off. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and the great comments that came through, and we'll have our virtual club gathering next week, and then we'll go back to our working from the shack editions the week after that. So 73, and I hope you have a great week. Stay safe, and we'll catch you next time.